Good morning from New York. I'm Sam Cedar in for Chris Hayes, here with Heather Hurlburt of the National Security Network, Reza Aslan of the Council on Foreign Relations, Phyllis Bennis from the Institute for Policy Studies, and Eli Lake, national security reporter for Newsweek and the Daily Beast. And Eli, you were basically just pointing out that Mitt Romney is being very cautious as to really, I guess, take a specific stance on foreign policy because he's got two constituencies in his own party that seem to be quite at odds with each other. So where does this leave us, Heather? I mean, theoretically, part of a presidential campaign is to hear ideas and to determine whether or not that's the type of leadership we want to invest in going forward. Can we really measure Mitt Romney's foreign policy when all we have is his desire to sort of jump into could have been a very serious crisis and just put out a statement?
Let me tell you what else we don't have, Sam. On Afghanistan, we know he didn't talk about it in his convention speech. He's both said, yes, I support winding down the war. He's also said, no, I don't support withdrawing any troops. It's hard to see how you wind down the war if you don't withdraw troops. He's proposed adding 100,000 troops to the military and substantially increasing the military budget. His advisors can't tell us what that would be used for, which is a little scary. He's severely criticized the president's handling of Iran, but then when you ask him what he would do differently, can't name a single thing. Has had almost nothing to say about the NATO alliance, almost nothing to say about the European economic crisis, has said he would institute trade sanctions against China on his first day, except, in his book, he says he's opposed to trade sanctions. So really, in terms of what are the things he believes about what policies will serve America's interests in the world, I got nothing for you.
It's an appallingly poorly run campaign. And you sort of, my heart goes out to him a little bit because, his original idea was just do no harm. Everybody does, is disappointed in Obama. The economy is in the tank. Just be the other guy. And that worked for a while, but now we're 2 months away from the election, and it's time to actually take a position on things. I understand what Eli is saying. He's in a terrible position. He's got a deeply fractured political party that if he loses might really spell the end of the GOP as we know it. But nevertheless, if he doesn't act boldly, if he doesn't take positions that might alienate somebody in his own party, the people in the middle aren't going to take him seriously.
But wait, there's his second principle, clarity and purpose.
But
we're not seeing that.
Let's look at where there are some significant differences, because I think there's some real dangers here that we are maybe glossing over a little bit. On the question of Iran, there is a clear difference between the so-called red lines of the Obama administration and the red lines of Mitt Romney.
But he
I'll
jumped
tell you
those
what they
red
are.
lines again on George Stephanopoulos.
But the overall position has been we would accept the Israeli red lines, which are the notion of nuclear capability on the part of Iran. And he's at times pulled back from that, then his advisors have gone out again, and at times he's said it. I agree with Eli, it hasn't been consistent.
He just said this week that his red lines were the weapon, which is the exact red line of Obama.
That's true. But then his advisors came back after that again and said that we would not allow nuclear capability. And that's a hugely different level of threat. There's a threat when you say red lines at all, because it undermines the possibility of diplomacy. But when
Why wouldn't it enhance the possibilities of diplomacy?
Because I don't think that, among other things, the Congress is making it very difficult for there to be any real diplomacy. There haven't been real discussions, real diplomatic engagements yet since the Obama administration came back. But let me just say that the notion of having red lines is inherently dangerous in my view. But when you have a red line that says we will prevent a nuclear weapon is one thing. When you say we will use military force to prevent nuclear capability, the Israeli position, that means today. That's arguably been reached today. And that's a much more dangerous scenario here, and that's a huge difference between the two campaigns.
So the other key difference, I think, is, as you say, the administration has been fairly clear. The Romney campaign has been all over the map. Meanwhile, the security establishment in the U.S. and even the security establishment in Israel
all agree.
We also saw Skokov, Brzezinski, 30 national security leaders come out with a report this week saying we have not had a serious enough conversation about costs and benefits. One of the costs is you lose the ability to marshal the international community behind you if you launch an attack. And nobody in the Romney campaign shows any awareness of wrestling with just how hard this is. To go back to this question of what would President Romney do, and that to me is the key difference. And it's
but what
really
President
unnerving.
Obama is not doing, and what I think he needs to do, is get out in front of this debate and say it's not about where's the red line, it's about the fact that all 16 of our intelligence agencies and most of the Israeli intelligence agencies, but all of ours agree on the three key things. Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon, is not building a nuclear weapon, and has not even decided whether or not to build a nuclear weapon. And when that's the case, even talking about this only serves the interests of Israel, diverting attention. That's exactly what the NIE said in 2007 and again in 2011.
I just think that's a very curious interpretation of it. Everybody agrees. Listen, everything that we know about the Iranian program is because someone in the international community caught them. We know from the latest IAEA report.
Are the ones who, quote, caught them.
How does that support your point, Phyllis? I don't understand that.
Anyway,
let's let Eli.
The IAEA's latest report has said that they've doubled the number of these admittedly crude P1 centrifuges in an underground base in the middle of Fordo. They have refused to agree to numerous requests from the international community to stop their enrichment. They have a missile program, which also the NIE says, and they continue to work on this. What the NIE and what the intelligence communities believe is that there has not been a decision to take all of these components and turn them into a nuclear weapon, but that's very different than saying they don't have one and they're not going to build one.
That's right.
That's
and I
their
the larger issue here is where does foreign policy in the United States stand? And I think that what you're seeing is a real backlash, not just from those on the left or the Democrats, but even from those on the right, but the notion that a foreign government like Israel, even an ally of ours, can dictate to us what our foreign policy interests should or should not be.
Absolutely.
I think is rubbing people the wrong way. I mean, maybe you
For all the
disagree,
right reasons.
I don't think that's what this is about. I think that Israel has a very different view of the threat. And while the Israeli security establishment is weighing a lot of different issues, including what it would do to the U.S.-Israel alliance if Israel unilaterally struck, it's not that the Israelis are saying, we need you to do this right now. They're saying, we're going to do it if you don't do it. And that's what I think we're at right now.
Enabled by our arms, by our money, that $4.1 billion a year that we gave this year, $3.1 billion over every year for 10 years. We're talking $30 billion of our tax money going directly to aid to Israel. And while the Israelis are claiming it's an existential threat, what it's really an existential threat to is the Israeli nuclear monopoly that exists today in the region, when they are the only country in the region that has a nuclear weapon, not under IAEA inspection, not acknowledged, and where the U.S. refuses also to acknowledge it. And the effect of it is that no one is talking to the Israelis, and we've seen it for months now, no one is talking to the Israelis about settlement, about the continuing occupation, about the siege of Gaza. None of these things are on the agenda because, oh my God, we're hearing that Israel thinks it's under an existential threat. The existential threat is on its nuclear monopoly.
Just to respond directly to what Eli said, I think it's important that Bibi has made it clear, and Ehud Barak himself, they've more or less admitted that by themselves an Israeli strike on Iran's suspected nuclear sites could at the very least perhaps slow down their nuclear progress. The only thing that would truly disrupt it is an American strike. Bibi has made it very clear in his actions and in his words that what he wants is an American military attack. An Israeli military attack is just not going to do it. When he threatens an Israeli military attack, the purpose of that threat is to force Obama into action, to force the American military into action. As Shaul Mofaz himself said, it's really quite remarkable that Bibi or any foreign leader has so deliberately inserted himself into an American election the way that he has.
I don't think it's deliberate. I think that's all spin.
Well,
I just don't think that's.
We're gonna talk more about this in the next segment because we're going to talk about Bibi Netanyahu, who's actually arriving, I believe, in the United States either today or tomorrow, and will be on Meet the Press. And we're going to follow up more on this because he's certainly been in the news, and this has also been involved the presidential campaign with Mitt Romney. I want to say Heather Hurlburt, Executive Director of the National Security Network, thanks for being here, and we will be right back and talk more about Israel and Romney and the presidential campaign. We're discussing Romney's position on the standoff over Iran's nuclear program, and Romney has promised that as president he would seriously consider military action if Iran does not immediately stop enriching uranium. And he has claimed that if President Obama is reelected, quote, Iran will have a nuclear weapon. The Obama administration has been decidedly more cautious, implementing harsh economic sanctions against Iran, but refusing to set a concrete timeline for a possible strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. That approach resulted in a major flare-up this week between the United States and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It began on Sunday when Secretary of State Hillary Clinton reiterated the Obama administration's commitment to a peaceful settlement in an interview with Bloomberg Radio.
We're not setting deadlines. We're convinced that we have more time to focus on these sanctions, to do everything we can to bring Iran to a good faith negotiation.
Netanyahu, who has demanded that the U.S. set a timeline for a military strike against Iran, responded to some of his harshest criticism of the Obama administration to date.
The world tells Israel, wait, there's still time. And I say, wait for what? Wait until when? Those in the international community who refuse to put red lines before Iran don't have a moral right to place a red light before Israel.
As the New York Times reported yesterday, Obama personally rebuffed Netanyahu's call for a red line with a phone call with the Israeli premier on Tuesday. In an interview Thursday with ABC, Romney criticized Obama's Iran policy but admitted that, as president, his red line would be the same as President Obama's.
My red line is Iran may not have a nuclear weapon. It is inappropriate for them to have the capacity to terrorize the world.
But your red line going forward is the same.
Yes.
Joining us now is Houmaid Majid, an Iranian journalist and author of The Ayatollah's Democracy, an Iranian Challenge. Welcome, Houmaid.
Morning.
And I want to bring in Daniel Levy, a senior research fellow at the New America Foundation's Middle East Task Force and a former special advisor to the Israeli Prime Minister during the administration of Ehud Barak via Skype. Welcome, Daniel.
Hi, Sam.
All right, Daniel, let's start with you. In Israel, are there politics that are taking place in Israel that is sort of pressuring Netanyahu to come out and really take on, I guess, Secretary of State Clinton's sort of refusal to put down a red line? Or is this, in other words, is he seems to be sort of flanked on both sides now?
I think it's very important for your viewers to know that there is not pressure in Israel, nor has there been, to take a harder line and to preemptively launch a solo military strike. The only protests there have been throughout the Iran-Israel situation have actually been in the opposite direction. They've not been massive protests, but they have been against military action. This is very top-driven. Part of it one can understand. It's quite clear what Netanyahu's preference is in the American election. It's clear that he wants this to be a distraction and for the Palestinian issue to go away. He clearly wants to push the Americans as close as possible to articulating positions and doing things in terms of a military positioning in the Gulf that make a clash more likely. But at some level, it's difficult not, though one hates to go there, it's difficult not to ask questions about what the former head of the Shin Bet, one of Israel's security agents, is called Netanyahu's messianism. So there is a sense that perhaps Netanyahu sees his role in this world, in the sweep of Jewish history, as to attack Iran. But that cuts against everything we know about Netanyahu as a risk-averse politician who doesn't like making decisions and who could well lose politically. Because what he's doing right now is beginning to have a cost in domestic political terms for Netanyahu, because people are seriously questioning, is this guy fit to govern and fit to manage the U.S.-Israel relationship?
Yeah, in fact, I mean, we're starting to see evidence of I mean, you're saying this is a top-down driven in Israel, and we had Defense Minister Ehud Barak in the Jerusalem Post on Tuesday wrote, "Do not forget that or was quoted as saying, do not forget that the U.S. is Israel's main ally. We have to remember the importance of our partnership with the U.S. We should do everything possible not to harm it." And this is coming off of what I believe was Barak's essentially backing off the notion of a unilateral strike. Daniel, I mean, is Netanyahu, is his coming out and sort of rebuffing Secretary of State Clinton, is that in response to sort of losing support amongst the political elite in Israel?
I think Netanyahu has gotten to a position where he feels he has to double down, which is what I think we're seeing in significant measure. He would like to be able to claim, I think, that whatever next happens in terms of sanctions going forward, in terms of language becoming more harsh, that this is down to him continuing to make credible and real the possibility of an Israeli strike. And he will then turn to the former Mossad heads or even to his own defense minister and say, you see, if we hadn't have stuck with my approach, we wouldn't have got these developments moving forward. But he's also backing himself into a corner in terms of the boy crying wolf. And I think his defense minister, Ehud Barak, thought it was time to climb down from the ladder. And Ehud Barak said, look, I've seen the American plans for a possible strike. The deputy chair of the Joint Chiefs was just over here. I think now we can be a little more calm in knowing that America is serious. Netanyahu chose not to use that as an opportunity for climbing down the ladder. That has to do with domestic politics. That has to do with his view of American politics. Don't forget that I think Netanyahu, in a significant way, also thinks even if Obama wins the elections, I can stare him down. He was caught on video, you know, after his first term of prime minister saying, America is an easy thing to lead by the nose, I think is the right translation. So I think Netanyahu, and he may have good reason for thinking this, feels that the United States president, even re-elected, will not be willing to be in an ongoing standoff with the Israeli prime minister, and that his forces that he can put into play in Obama's backyard are strong enough. I think it's a high-risk strategy. Many Israelis are deeply uncomfortable with it, but it makes sense from Netanyahu's viewpoint to it.
I want to thank Daniel Levy from the New America Foundation's Middle East Task Force for joining us this morning. Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Sam, and to your guests.
We're going to take a break, and we'll come back, and we'll allow you guys to answer that question, and particularly after the President Obama has rebuffed, I guess, Benjamin Netanyahu's rebuffing of the Secretary of State. We'll see if you think that Netanyahu still feels that same way about leading America by the nose. Okay, we're talking about how this past week there has been an imbroglio between Benjamin Netanyahu and leaders of the Obama administration. And there may be some type of, maybe not a turning point, maybe in the mind of Netanyahu about his capacity to lead the American administration. But let's just talk just briefly of what Mitt Romney would do in terms of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which is a pretty stunning, I guess, outsourcing of foreign policy. Here he is at the Iowa Republican presidential debate in 2011.
I've also known Bibi Netanyahu for a long time. We worked together at Boston Consulting Group. I get on the phone to my friend Bibi Netanyahu and say, would it help if I said this? What would you like me to do?
Does that give you confidence? Will President Romney call up every foreign leader and ask them what he's supposed to say?
Talking points from Bibi. But I think it's important to mention that in the Middle East, and particularly in countries like Iran, which don't have good relations with the United States, people already think that the White House calls Bibi Netanyahu or whomever is the Prime Minister of Israel, or at least Israel influences foreign policy when it comes to the Middle East. Certainly the Egyptians think that, a lot of the Egyptians think that, people across North Africa and the Arab world think that Israel basically runs our foreign policy. Not to the degree that would-be President Romney said, but at least to a large degree. So I think, yeah, it's something that is a little scary. I think Obama has demonstrated at least this week that he's not that kind of president, and I think that probably resonates quite a bit in the Middle East, and I think it probably gains him some measure of sympathy among the people who are already against American foreign policy, saying, wait a sec, no, we don't set red lines when you tell us to set red lines. By the way, as everybody here has mentioned, there already is a red line for Iran. Iran knows that that red line is there, and Iran's response to that red line has been, we're not building weapons, so what's the problem? I'm not saying that they're right, but I'm just saying that that's been their response. And certainly I think it's true what Hillary says and what Obama has said, that there is plenty of time. I know Netanyahu said there, wait for what? Wait for there to be a point at which there is no more time to stop Iran from having a nuclear weapon. But by the way, I think this is a much bigger issue. The war idea, and Bill Keller wrote about this in the New York Times this week, a very good op-ed about this issue of going to war with Iran. Let's think about it. Even if Iran decided tomorrow to build a nuclear weapon, the only way that we could actually prevent them from doing that, is a ground invasion. Let's be honest about this. There is no way to prevent Iran, if they make that decision to build a weapon at this point, that we can stop it. We can't stop it with a strike. We can delay it. I think even the United States can't stop it. We can do it by changing the regime and installing a puppet government there. I don't know even if that's going to work, but let's say that's probably the minimum that would be required. And nobody wants to talk about that. They want to talk about surgical military strikes. They don't want to talk about the number of people who are going to die. When I've been in Iran in the past, I've talked to people who are anti-regime people who've been in jail, who've been in Evin, who've been tortured, who say if there's an attack, we will fight for Iran.
Right.
So it's not as simple as we think. Oh, let's just go in and bomb these facilities and we're going to be okay. So I think it's a much larger discussion.
Now, Eli, I mean, when you hear, now I know that this is obviously a campaign, but when you hear President Romney, would-be President Romney, saying, I'm just going to call up and find out what he would like me to say, is that problematic?
I think he's basically saying that Israel's an ally, and he would consult as Obama consults with other U.S. allies.
Right.
And how's that any different when Obama, talks about his fondness for Erdogan in Turkey, or Bush has talked about his fondness for Tony Blair. I mean,
it's a weird turn of phrase.
It's a very strange. But it plays into a kind of paranoid fiction that many elites, unfortunately, in the Middle East believe, as our friend says just now, that there is some sort of relationship of a wag the dog where the Israelis are dictating U.S. foreign policy or controlling U.S. foreign policy. And sadly, we've seen in recent years some people in the U.S. media and others echo this kind of thing, and I just think that that's just not how the world works.
We talked about that clip.
It says something more about those saying that theory than any.
Well, we talked about that clip of Netanyahu saying that he thought that he was wagging the dog a little bit. But let me ask you this. Do you think Netanyahu thinks that dynamic is changing? In other words, what we're watching this week, where he is saying that we're running out of time, do you think that he's talking necessarily about the window for a strike against Iran in his mind is closing? Or is it that his opportunity to, maybe with the election and the way that the election is heading, that his opportunity to get America on board with that is closing?
I think it's pretty clear. Prime Minister Netanyahu does not believe Barack Obama when he says he will prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. He thinks that Obama's real policy in a second term would be containment, and he thinks that that's something that Israel can't live with. And I have to say, I think that all these Israeli national security experts who are sometimes dissidents in Israel against Netanyahu's policy, I don't think they could live with that either.
Can I just come back to this question of who makes U.S. foreign policy? I don't think Israel makes U.S. foreign policy. I think the U.S. does. But I think U.S. policy, since the days of the Cold War, has looked at Israel as a crucial strategic, not just ally, arm of U.S. policy. And then we lost it as a strategic asset with the end of the Cold War. And for about 10 years, Israel, there was a big debate about, is Israel now maybe even not only not an ally, not only not an asset, but maybe it's a problem for us. During the first Gulf War in 1991, we saw that. We saw George Bush the first being willing for the first time to make a little bit of a challenge to U.S. Support for settlements. But then, all of a sudden, after September 11, Israel is back as a strategic ally. All that time, you have a lobby in this country, which is very influential. There's no question about it. It doesn't make the policy. But based on this question of the intersection of the interests and work of the lobby and the strategic views in the Pentagon in particular of Israel as the strategic ally.
Can I say
I
want to respond to that. This is something that I really
I'm going to give you a chance to respond to that.
Let me just finish.
I'll give you a chance to respond to that, Eli, and a chance for you to finish. We'll be right back after this. Okay, so Phyllis, why don't you finish your point about the relationship, I guess, between Israel and...
You know, we heard, Sam, last year, there was a moment when we were hearing about how the U.S. is criticizing Israel too much. We heard from the Republicans that the Obama administration is throwing Israel under a bus. Well, let's look at what really happened. We didn't see even any pressure around settlements. We heard a series of requests. Please stop building settlements. Answer, no. Pressure would have looked like, stop building settlements, it's illegal. Answer, no. Answer to that, okay, you're an independent country, you can do what you want, but you know that $4 billion we're giving you this year? Actually, it was only $3.1 billion at that time. We're not doing that anymore. And you know how we protect you in the UN so that with all the resolutions that are passed, no Israeli officials, either military or political, are ever held accountable for potential war crimes? We're not doing that anymore either. That's what pressure looks like, and we haven't seen it. That's not because the Israelis say it. It's because that's been U.S. policy with both parties in power for way too long. And when we see, as we were just hearing, in the Middle East, when people see what the U.S. did, for example, when the Palestinians were accepted as a member of UNESCO, and the U.S. response is to cut $70 billion, $70 million from the UNESCO budget that goes to things like tsunami warnings that are crucial to U.S. interests, people look and say, why would they do that?
Eli, well, so respond to that. Do you think?
Well, very briefly, and then I want to get to more of the Iran point about Israel. But the first year, Netanyahu did agree to a settlement freeze. There was a disagreement about whether it applied to East Jerusalem, and it was left there. But I'm saying that I think that there had been some efforts. He did give a speech at Bar-Ilan University, I think, at the urging of Obama. But the point about Iran and Israel...
Well, wait, hold on. Before we get to Iran, I mean, do you think that the United States, particularly under the Obama administration, has been pressuring Israel more on things like settlements than in the past? I mean, do you really think there's been an increase in sort of leverage here? I mean, it seems to me there's been...
I would say that you started to see it under the Bush administration when Colin Powell and George W. Bush at the UN called for a Palestinian state, and you've seen an evolution of at least the level of official that would express concerns about settlements. For many years, it would be something that would be done in a press release from the U.S. Consul's office under President Obama. The President of the United States articulates this himself, and that is
so there's been a sort of an evolution.
Phyllis Bennis is correct in the sense that there haven't been threats at the fundamentals of the relationship, but there's a strategic reason for that. Everybody knows America's Israel's main and only most important friend, and that how the United States treats its allies is observed by everybody else about whether it's good to be America's ally or not.
But 25% of our entire foreign aid budget going to the 23rd wealthiest country in the world.
You don't like Israel, I understand, but I'm just saying.
Well, I mean, I don't
like tax money.
I don't know if that's fair. I mean,
fair enough. But
we're not going to give 25% to all of our friends.
Listen,
so the
I don't think the aid money is
let Reza get in.
Well, I'm going to help Eli get to the Iran point, because there's a larger philosophical issue here, and that is this question of whether America's interests in the region are in alignment with Israel's interests in the region. You hear this from politicians constantly, that our values are the same, our interests are the same. Well, they're not the same. Our interests are actually sometimes divergent.
I agree with that.
Iran is a perfect example of this.
I don't know about that.
It is in Israel's interest to cease all uranium enrichment in Iran, full stop. That will never happen, and it is not going to be Obama policy, because it's a failed start. So in this particular regard, when we're talking about negotiations, Netanyahu can say from his position that negotiations have led nowhere because Iran is still enriching uranium. Fact, true, except that Iran is going to continue enriching uranium regardless of whatever the outcome of a negotiation is, and President Obama, who's running for office, can't negotiate with that postulate. He can't begin by saying, number one, yes, you have a right to enrich uranium. He has to wait till the elections are over. There's this weird sort of pause when it comes to Iran. And the pause is the perfect way of putting this. What Obama is saying is not there's time. He's saying to really do something about Iran's nuclear program, I'm going to have to say things and sacrifice things that will hurt me politically, and I will not do that until these elections are over.
All right, we'll take a break and we'll pick up from there. Okay, so when we broke, Reza was making the point that President Obama is restricted by the campaign in terms of what he can say in addressing Iran. And
what he can do, actually. I mean, Netanyahu is right about one thing, that negotiations and diplomacy haven't worked. But the reason they haven't worked is because they don't exist. And they haven't existed. What has happened in the last year has been that the United States has made offers to Iran that have been take it or leave it offers that would have been impossible, and I think the Obama administration knew ahead of time, because the Russians certainly told them, and the Turks told them, and other people told them, that these demands will not work unless there's some relief somewhere else, like on the sanctions, for example, which the U.S. says no. But the Iranians know that too. They're sitting there and waiting for the election to be over as well. They're not stupid. They're saying, we understand. We know what the situation is for Obama. And for them, they're saying, we don't really care who's the president, but we know nothing's going to happen until then. So we have no incentive to do anything right now. The only thing they have done, which is significant, I guess, and then been pointed out in the press a little bit, is that some of that 20% enriched uranium has been converted, according to the latest IAEA report, to fuel plates, which can't then be converted to reprocessed into fuel. So what they're doing is kind of like sitting there with this, status quo, not increasing the number of centrifuges, but not actually running them, for example, in Fordo. So kind of trying to leave it as it is, try to play out the sanctions till November, and then see if there's actually going to be real offers then.
The first year of Obama's administration, he wrote personal letters to the Supreme Leader, and he announced that there would be a pause to any further sanctions, and he said that America and under him would be interested in discussions. And the Iranians responded by stealing an election that was won by their more democratic opposition, murdering lots of protesters, and then concealing an underground facility known as Fordo from the world until it was smoked out by U.S. intelligence. And that's how the Iranians responded. I think that the issue here is not... Well, the issue here...
Do you think that was directly a response?
I'm saying that the Iranians have... How is it preposterous?
It's a very simplistic way of looking at it. The Iranians said, well, no, you can actually go and look at the quotes. The Supreme Leader gave a speech when Obama was elected and saying, we think his words are great. We understand his words. But now we'd like to see some action.
But if you're going to say that President Obama writing this letter I
didn't say that. What I'm trying to make a point is that there have been good faith efforts under lots of presidents to try to reach a deal with these people. And what they've been radical revolutionary fanatics that are not interested in an entente. Well, you know what? I just think that that's a fiction. There have been so many efforts to try to talk to them and reason with them, and they always say no.
What about 2003?
What about 2003? What about
the offer
facts from Tim Gilderman? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, I happen to know the person who's the author of it, who is a close associate of the Supreme Leader. That was a real offer. A number of people have
not according to Dick Armitage.
Well, if you want to believe it.
So hold on.
And by the way, if that was a real offer, then why did they continue to send killer teams against U.S. forces in Iraq? Because they're at war with America.
Iran isn't any different than any other country. It serves its own interests, and those interests are absolutely against America's interests. And so when Iran supports Hezbollah or supports Hamas or continues movement on its nuclear ambitions, we see that as a direct attack against us, when in reality it's just them supporting their own national security interests, which is what they're going to do. If we're going to have a good faith negotiation, and look, Iran has lied, it's cheated, let's not pretend otherwise, okay? It has not met its international obligations.
Nor has the U.S. on nuclear issues. Let's be very clear.
The larger issue is here that there is a framework for give and take. There is a framework for a pause in nuclear enrichment or a reducing of it to 5% or 3.5% in exchange for a slow removal of sanctions. That is something that both the Obama administration and the Iranian government have given positive signals to, but it ain't gonna happen until the elections are over.
Well, I'm sorry, Uman, that's where we're going to have to end it. So what do we know now that we didn't know last week? My answers and the panels after this. So what do we know now that we didn't know last week? Well, we know that voter rights groups in Florida won a partial victory when the Florida Department of State agreed on Wednesday to inform 2,625 citizens who were mistakenly removed from the voter rolls that they may indeed vote in the November election. We know that although Republican Governor Rick Scott has spent months warning about massive voter fraud, Florida has caught and charged and convicted only one person of the crime, a Canadian named Joseph Seaver, who also pleaded guilty to obtaining a firearms license by falsely claiming he was a U.S. citizen. We know that unless it can be proved in court that Florida broke the federal law banning voter purges within 90 days of a federal election, Governor Scott intends to continue his crusade against this imaginary threat right up until Election Day. We know that democracy is under attack in Florida, not only when it comes to who is allowed to vote, but also what they are allowed to vote for. Although citizens in Orange County gathered and verified the requisite 50,000 signatures to get earned sick leave on the ballot, we know the Orange County Commission voted unanimously to delay consideration of the measure after lobbyists for multi-billion-dollar corporations like Disney weighed in. We know the commissioners said they need to delay until October 16th to find a less confusing ballot title and summary, which is unfortunately almost a month past the deadline for printing the ballot. We know that even though the Orlando Sentinel's editorial board agrees with critics of the proposal, it called the commission maneuver part of a, quote, bag of dirty tricks that the commissioners had, quote, broken faith with county voters. And then the board asked, is it any wonder that so many people are cynical about their government? We know that the strike by 29,000 public school teachers and support staff in Chicago kept students out of school this week. And we know that despite the havoc it created, 55% of voting Chicago households and 66% of parents of public school students support the strike. We know that the teachers union and Rahm Emanuel continued to negotiate on Friday without reaching a deal. And we know that so far, public school parents have the teachers' backs. And finally, we know that while vice presidential nominee Paul Ryan tries to fire up the Republican base for Mitt Romney, polls in Wisconsin show that Ryan's congressional opponent, former up-guest Democrat Rob Zerbin, is gaining on him in an increasingly competitive race for his House seat. We know that Zerbin's campaign's polling from FM3 Research shows that after voters were read a profile statement about Zerbin, he was only 8 points behind Ryan, 39 to 47%. 11% remain undecided. We know that Zerbin, a chef and a former business owner, has been casting Ryan as an out-of-touch Washington insider who never had any real-world experience running a business. And if voters want real change in this election, we know they're going to have to pay as much attention to key down-ballot races as they're paying to the presidential campaign. And I want to find out what my guests know now that they didn't know when the week began. Let's start with you, Houman.
Well, I think we always knew that Mitt Romney was pretty tone deaf when it came to foreign policy, but now we know he's incredibly insensitive as well when it comes to what happened in Egypt. And I think that that's something that will resonate with voters over time. I think it's not going to go away. His statement and his doubling down on his statement about the deaths of the protests in Cairo and the deaths of the American diplomats in Libya is something that just shows that he is, as other people have pointed out, not prepared to take that 3 a.m. call.
Reza.
Well, I'll thank Max Fisher at The Atlantic for this. What we know is that even though we keep talking about the Middle East as the Muslim world, that of the top 5 most populous Muslim countries in the world, only one of them is in the Middle East, Egypt. And that, in truth, that when we talk about the 21st century and the Muslims, we're going to be talking increasingly about Indonesia and Malaysia and South Asia and Turkey. This is where the future of Islam actually rests. And I don't think it's any irony that this was the part of the world in which the protests were most peaceful, in which there wasn't violence, there weren't attacks against Americans or consulates.
And Phyllis?
We know that the discourse on how people in the United States see the Middle East conflict, and particularly the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, has changed dramatically and continues to change. And we know that again this week when we saw at the DNC the response to what was claimed to be a two-thirds vote in support of moving the embassy to Jerusalem, where it was clearly not a two-thirds vote, and there was a great deal of anger on the floor, so that the grassroots of the Democratic Party itself is joining that much wider shift in public discourse on this question.
Eli.
We know from the unauthorized Navy SEAL book about the bin Laden raid that bin Laden was found by a woman from the CIA known as Jen. And we know from a feature story I have in Newsweek coming out on Monday that women, more often than not, tend to be what are known as targeting analysts, who often find the location of senior terrorists and other narco traffickers that are then either captured or killed by Navy SEAL teams or drone strikes.
All right. Well, my thanks to Iranian journalist Humad Majed and Reza Aslan from the Council of Foreign Relations, Phyllis Bennis from the Institute for Policy Studies, and Eli Lake from Newsweek and the Daily Beast. Thanks for getting up with us. And thank you for joining us today for Up. Join us tomorrow, Sunday morning at 8. Coming up next is Melissa Harris Perry. On today's MHP, the looming landslide. New polls and other signs point to a potential big win for President Obama, but the coordinated effort underway to intimidate voters at the ballot box could be the undoing of Democrats. Melissa has the author of a new report with details on Melissa Harris Perry coming up next. We'll see you right here tomorrow at 8. I'm Sam Cedar from the Majority Report at majorityreport.fm, in for Chris Hayes. Thanks for getting up.
Everybody stay put.